In a quiet street in Enfield, North London, stood a modest brick house at number 284 Green Street. It was the kind of house that blended into the neighborhood, ordinary and unremarkable. Inside lived Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, and her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. Life for the Hodgsons was simple, calm, and routine, or so it seemed. One late August evening in 1977, a strange tension filled the house. Janet, 11 years old, sat on her bed, reading a book by the dim light of a small lamp. The room was silent, except for the occasional creak of the house settling. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the walls. Janet froze. It sounded too loud, too deliberate to be normal. She called out to her brother Johnny, who was in the next room, and together they listened as the knocking continued. First from the wall behind Janet, then shifting to the far corner. At first, Peggy tried to dismiss it. Houses make noises, she told herself. Old houses even more so. But deep down, she felt a cold knot of unease. That night, she checked every room, every corner, but found nothing unusual. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had passed through their home. The following day, the disturbances grew more pronounced. Janet awoke to find her bed shaking violently, as though invisible hands were trying to lift her. The sheets rustled unnaturally. Objects on the dresser rattled without cause. Janet screamed for her mother. Peggy rushed in, heart pounding, only to see the bed trembling slightly, despite no one touching it. A cold draft swept the room, chilling her to the bone. By the third night, the activity became impossible to ignore. Chairs slid across the floor on their own, cups toppled from tables, and books flew from shelves. The children cried out in fear, certain that some presence had entered their home. Even Peggy could no longer rationalize these events. It was as if the house had turned against them, becoming alive in some malevolent way. Neighbors soon took notice. Mrs. Nottingham, who lived next door, reported hearing loud banging sounds in the middle of the night. One evening, she peeked through the window and saw a chair slowly inching across the floor. Terrified, she left immediately, muttering about spirits. Word spread quickly. The quiet street had become a place of whispers, a neighborhood buzzing with fear and curiosity. Desperate for help, Peggy called the police. Officers arrived and were immediately confronted with strange phenomena. They heard knocking and thumping inside the walls. A chair in the corner of the living room wobbled and slid across the floor without explanation. One officer, shaken, admitted later that he could not explain what he had witnessed. Though they were skeptical by nature, even the authorities could not deny something unusual was happening. The family soon became a focal point for local journalists. Cameras and tape recorders were set up in the house, capturing strange sounds and moments that seemed to defy logic. In one particularly eerie instance, Janet appeared to float slightly above her bed, though she claimed no memory of doing so. The image, blurry yet chilling, would later become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in paranormal history. It was around this time that Janet began speaking in a voice that was not her own. Deep, rough, and commanding, it identified itself as Bill Wilkins, a former resident who had died in the house years before. The voice recounted details of Bill's life and death, sometimes revealing knowledge that no child could have known. Neighbors and visitors reported hearing the voice clearly, and its unnatural tone sent shivers down the spine of anyone who listened. By now, the Hodgson family's home had transformed from a safe haven into a place of fear. Nights were sleepless, filled with the terror of knocking walls, moving furniture, and disembodied voices. Everyday objects became unpredictable threats. The children, once carefree, began to tremble at the slightest noise. Even Peggy, a strong and resilient woman, felt her resolve weaken under the weight of these relentless occurrences. It was clear that the events were not confined to imagination or childish play. There was something else in that house, something unseen and inexplicable. The ordinary brick walls of 284 Green Street had become a theater for forces beyond understanding. The Hodgsons were now unwilling stars of a haunting that would soon attract national attention, paranormal investigators, and skeptics alike. And yet, Despite the fear and uncertainty, the family had little choice but to endure. They were trapped in a nightmare that refused to end, a mystery that would soon be documented more extensively than any other haunting in England. What had begun as a single knock on the wall had escalated into a series of terrifying events, shaking the very foundations of their lives. And it was only the beginning. Days had passed since the first strange knocks echoed through the Hodgson home, but peace had not returned. Instead, the disturbances had grown stronger, more frightening, and impossible to ignore. Peggy Hodgson awoke one morning with a sense of dread, a feeling that something unseen had been moving through the house during the night. The family had begun to notice that ordinary tasks now carried the weight of fear. It began subtly. Objects were slightly out of place, doors left ajar, chairs slightly shifted. But soon, the activity became impossible to explain. Cups toppled from tables, books tumbled from shelves, and drawers opened and slammed shut on their own. Even Peggy, who had been skeptical at first, could no longer deny that something extraordinary and terrifying was happening. Janet, the youngest daughter, was most affected. She complained that her bed seemed alive at night, trembling and shaking even when no one was near. On one chilling evening, Peggy walked into Janet's room to find her bed rocking violently. The girl clung to her blanket, eyes wide with fear, whispering that someone is here. The air felt cold, and a faint, unexplainable wind brushed through the room despite all windows being closed. Peggy shivered, realizing that this was no ordinary night. Soon, it was not just objects moving but voices. At first, they were whispers, soft and indecipherable. Then, one evening, Janet began speaking in a deep, guttural voice that was not her own. She claimed it belonged to Bill Wilkins, a former tenant of the house who had died years before. The voice described Bill's life, his daily routines, and even his death in chilling detail. Peggy and the children were terrified. The sound was unnatural, echoing through the house, low and commanding. Even Peggy felt a chill creep down her spine every time she heard it. Neighbors began to take notice. Some heard the loud knocks and bangs themselves. One neighbor reported seeing a chair move across the living room floor without anyone touching it. Another claimed to hear Janet speaking in a strange voice from her bedroom window late at night. The quiet street of Enfield, once ordinary and calm, now hummed with fear and curiosity. One night, the situation escalated further. Peggy was downstairs when she heard a series of loud thuds from upstairs. Rushing to Janet's room, she saw the bed shaking violently. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, and the blankets fluttered as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. Then, with an almost surreal movement, Janet seemed to rise slightly above the bed for a moment before crashing back down. Peggy gasped and called for Johnny to come help, but he could not explain what he saw. Even as an older child, he could not comprehend the strange power at work. Desperate for answers, Peggy reached out to the local authorities and eventually to paranormal investigators. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair of the Society for Psychical Research were contacted, and they immediately began documenting the events. They installed cameras, audio recorders, and spent long hours in the house observing the unexplained phenomena. Every night brought something new: furniture sliding across the floor, loud knocks from unseen corners, and objects appearing in places they should not have been. At times, the disturbances seemed playful. Chairs would spin slowly, or small objects would float briefly in the air. But at other times, they were frighteningly aggressive. Heavy furniture toppled suddenly, doors slammed with alarming force, and the voices sometimes screamed in anger or warning. The family lived in a constant state of fear, never knowing what the next night would bring. Janet's levitation incidents continued, though more cautiously observed this time. Several neighbors and investigators claimed to witness her rising several inches above the bed, sometimes tilting or floating as if suspended by invisible strings. The images captured on Polaroid and video added to the growing documentation. Even skeptics were forced to admit that something unexplainable was happening in the Hodgson home. Amid all this chaos, Peggy tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Meals were cooked, laundry was done, and the children tried to attend school, but the oppressive presence of the poltergeist shadowed every moment. Sleep became rare. The nights stretched endlessly with knocking, shuffling furniture, and the eerie voice of Bill Wilkins. The once ordinary house had transformed into a place of fear, suspense, and mystery. Despite the terror, the Hodgsons remained resilient. They clung to each other, finding strength in unity, even as the haunting intensified. Outsiders came and went, trying to capture evidence of the paranormal. Some dismissed it as trickery or imagination, while others were genuinely shocked by what they witnessed. One thing was certain: 284 Green Street was no longer just a house. It had become a stage for forces beyond understanding, a place where the ordinary world collided with the extraordinary. As the weeks passed, the haunting deepened. It was clear that this was only the beginning. What had started as knocking on walls had grown into a full-blown spectacle of supernatural activity. Janet's voice, the moving furniture, and the unexplained levitations marked a terrifying escalation. For the Hodgson family, there was no turning back. They were now living inside a story that the world would soon hear. A story that blurred the line between reality and the supernatural. A story that would haunt generations to come. By the time the third week of the strange happenings arrived, the Hodgson household was a place of unease and fear. Nights had become unbearable. Doors slammed without warning. Furniture moved unpredictably, and objects flew across rooms. Peggy and her children were exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But nothing compared to the emergence of a voice that would terrify them to the core. A voice claiming to belong to someone long dead. It started subtly. Janet, the youngest daughter, had been playing quietly in her room when she suddenly froze. Her eyes widened, and her lips trembled as she began to speak in a low, unfamiliar tone. The voice was deep, rough, and commanding, far beyond what a child of 11 could produce. It introduced itself as Bill Wilkins, a former resident of the house who had died decades earlier. Janet's body seemed calm, but the words were chilling. "I lived here," she said in a voice not her own. "I died here. You cannot stay." Peggy rushed into the room, her heart hammering. The children had grown accustomed to strange noises and moving objects, but a speaking spirit was something entirely different. "Janet? Who are you talking to?" Peggy asked, fear tightening her throat. The girl simply stared at the wall, unblinking, her expression strangely detached yet haunted. Over the next few days, the apparition grew more active. The voice of Bill Wilkins would appear at random moments, sometimes whispering from behind walls, sometimes shouting commands from the living room. The family reported hearing it in multiple locations at the same time, as if it were not bound to Janet alone. Objects would respond to the voice. A chair might topple as Bill shouted, or a picture frame would slide across the wall as if pushed by an invisible hand. Neighbors and visitors were drawn to the house, eager to witness the events firsthand. Several claimed to hear the unmistakable voice, some reporting that it seemed angry, resentful, or sad. On one chilling evening, a neighbor peeked through the window just as Janet recited details of Bill's life. The house he had lived in, the furniture he had once owned, the cold winter that had claimed him. The accuracy of these details left witnesses stunned, and the fear in Peggy's eyes was mirrored in everyone who entered the house. The levitation incidents intensified during this time. Several witnesses saw Janet rise slightly above her bed, her body rigid, as though suspended by invisible strings. During these moments, the voice of Bill Wilkins would often speak directly to Peggy, issuing warnings or making cryptic remarks. One night, as Peggy held her breath in the doorway, the voice whispered, "You cannot leave. I will not let you." The words were simple, yet the tone carried a weight of authority and menace that chilled her to the bone. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, the investigators from the Society for Psychical Research, arrived to document the events with equipment and cameras. They observed Janet speaking in the voice of Bill Wilkins for hours, sometimes answering questions posed to her, sometimes issuing warnings of danger. One observer described feeling a cold, oppressive presence in the room, as if the air itself had thickened. Even the police who visited could not explain what they saw. Chairs toppled on their own, Heavy objects slid across floors, and doors slammed shut without warning. The voice of Bill Wilkins, sometimes calm, sometimes threatening, was heard by multiple people simultaneously. Peggy began to sleep lightly, always ready to intervene should the voice become aggressive. Her children, once playful, were now cautious, alert to the slightest sound or movement. The apparition's presence seemed intelligent. It was not random. It responded to questions and seemed to be aware of the family's actions. Bill Wilkins' voice sometimes spoke of past events in the house, things no one could have known. The investigators recorded over 2,000 separate incidents during their time at the house, many of which involved direct interactions with the voice. Some nights, the family felt a strange calm. The voice would speak softly, almost conversationally, as if observing them rather than threatening them. Other nights, the voice would erupt in anger, causing objects to fly violently, creating chaos in the once peaceful home. The unpredictability of these events kept the family in a constant state of fear. Despite the terror, the Hodgsons were determined to endure. They learned to live with the presence, to navigate the house cautiously, and to support each other through the nights. The apparition of Bill Wilkins had transformed their lives. No longer just mysterious knocks or moving furniture. The haunting had become personal, interactive, and terrifyingly real. By the end of the third week, the house at 284 Green Street had become a household name in Enfield. The story of the speaking spirit, the levitating child, and the moving objects spread throughout the community. The world would soon hear of the Enfield Poltergeist, and the haunting that had begun so subtly would grow into one of the most documented and debated paranormal cases in history. For Peggy and her children, life had changed forever. The apparition of Bill Wilkins was not just a ghost story. It was a terrifying reality they could neither ignore nor escape. And yet, they endured, clinging to each other and the hope that one day, the house would return to normal. But deep down, they knew that the presence within their home was far from finished. Weeks had passed since the Hodgson family first noticed the strange knocks and disembodied voices. By now, the house at 284 Green Street had become a place of fear and anticipation. Every night, Peggy and her children wondered what new horror would manifest. But nothing could prepare them for the most terrifying phenomenon yet, the levitation of Janet. It began on an ordinary evening. The sun had dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the street. Inside the Hodgson home, Janet was preparing for bed, her small body tense with unease. The previous days had been filled with furniture moving on its own, objects flying through the air, and the terrifying voice of Bill Wilkins. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Peggy was in the kitchen finishing the evening meal when a loud crash came from upstairs. She rushed to Janet's bedroom and froze at the doorway. The bed was shaking violently, and Janet was no longer clinging to her blankets. She was hovering several inches above the mattress, her body rigid, eyes wide with fear. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Peggy could see the shadows on the walls stretching unnaturally, the dim lamplight flickering as if the electricity itself feared what it witnessed. "Janet, hold on," Peggy cried, rushing closer, but she stopped, unsure of what action could possibly help. The sight before her was impossible to explain. The young girl floated above the bed as though held by invisible hands. Objects around the room, books, toys, a small chair, began to tremble and shift in reaction to some unseen force. The air grew colder, and Peggy could see her own breath misting in front of her face. Janet's eyes darted around the room, fixating on corners where no one stood. Then, in a voice that was not her own, deep and commanding, she spoke. "You cannot stop me. This is my home." The words chilled Peggy to the bone. She had heard the voice of Bill Wilkins before, but this time it resonated in the room, stronger and more personal, as if it had merged with Janet's very body. Neighbors who had gathered outside, drawn by earlier disturbances, heard the commotion. Some peered through the windows and claimed to see the girl levitating, her small frame suspended in the air, her hair lifted slightly as if caught in a supernatural breeze. Others described a soft glow around her, subtle but unmistakable, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, the investigators from the Society for Psychical Research, arrived that night, cameras and recording equipment in hand. They documented every movement, every sound, and every reaction of the girl. The photographs captured Janet mid-air, body rigid, hair lifted, blankets fluttering unnaturally. Even skeptics who reviewed the images admitted that something unexplainable was happening. As the night wore on, the levitation repeated several times. Each incident seemed to grow in intensity. At times, Janet floated higher, her entire body clearly suspended above the bed. Objects around the room responded violently. Drawers slid open, chairs toppled, and picture frames shook on the walls. The room itself seemed alive, responding to the will of an invisible entity. Peggy tried to calm her daughter, holding out her hands, speaking softly, but Janet did not respond to her. The voice of Bill Wilkins echoed again. "This house is mine. You will leave." It was not a threat in words alone. The tone carried a weight that felt like pressure in the room, as though the walls themselves were pressing in. By dawn, the incidents subsided, leaving the family exhausted and terrified. The investigators had gathered ample documentation, photographs, audio recordings, and witness statements. Every person who had witnessed the levitation described a moment of sheer disbelief and horror. For Peggy, it was a night she would never forget. Her home, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground between the living and the unseen. Over the following days, the levitation episodes continued, though never predictably. Janet's fear was palpable, her sleep disrupted, her days tense and anxious. The family lived with constant dread, never knowing when the next incident would strike. Still, despite the terror, Peggy and her children tried to maintain normal life, attending school and work, eating meals, and going through daily routines as best they could. The levitation incident marked a turning point in the Enfield haunting. It was no longer just strange noises or moving objects. The presence had become personal, physical, and undeniable. The world outside would soon hear of these events, and the photographs, recordings, and testimonies would make the Hodgson home one of the most famous haunted locations in England. Peggy often sat in the quiet of the living room, watching her children sleep, wondering if the house would ever be normal again. The floating bed, the mysterious voice, and the reaction of objects around Janet had changed their lives forever. The levitation incident had proven one thing. Whatever haunted 284 Green Street was real, powerful, and not finished. And the Hodgson family had no choice but to endure, trapped in a nightmare that the world would soon come to witness. The strange events at 284 Green Street had escalated beyond anything Peggy Hodgson could manage alone. Objects flew through rooms, doors slammed with violent force, and Janet's levitation had become a frightening nightly occurrence. Sleep had become a luxury, and the children lived in constant fear. Peggy knew she could no longer face the haunting on her own. She needed help, people who understood the paranormal. Word had reached the Society for Psychical Research in London, and soon 2 investigators, Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, arrived at the Hodgson home. They were calm, methodical, and unafraid, carrying cameras, tape recorders, and notebooks. Their job was simple: observe, document, and attempt to understand the strange phenomena that had terrified an entire family. The first night of their investigation was tense. Peggy guided them through the house, pointing out areas of disturbance. The bedroom where Janet had levitated, the living room where chairs had toppled, and the hallway where mysterious knocks had echoed. The investigators listened carefully, taking notes and preparing their equipment. Despite their experience, even they could feel the heavy, chilling atmosphere of the house. The air seemed thicker than normal, carrying a faint, icy draft that whispered through the rooms. As darkness fell, the activity began again. Chairs slid across the floor on their own, cups rattled in cupboards, and doors slammed shut without warning. Janet, terrified but accustomed to the presence, sat on her bed as if expecting the supernatural. Her eyes were wide, focused on corners of the room where shadows moved in unnatural ways. She spoke in her normal voice and then, suddenly, in the deep, commanding voice of Bill Wilkins. The investigators froze. The voice was distinct, harsh, and eerily confident, speaking knowledge only a former resident could know. Grosse and Playfair immediately began documenting everything. Cameras were set up in multiple rooms. Tape recorders captured audio of the knocks and whispers, and motion-sensitive devices monitored the movement of objects. Every night, they spent hours observing, recording, and questioning Janet. Sometimes she answered in her own voice. Sometimes, the voice of Bill Wilkins responded to questions no child should have known the answers to. The investigators noticed a pattern. The activity seemed strongest in Janet's bedroom, particularly around her bed, and often coincided with moments of emotional stress or fear. Objects would fly more violently when she was upset, and the voice of Bill Wilkins would grow louder and more commanding. Chairs and tables seemed to obey the entity's will, moving in precise, deliberate ways that suggested intelligence rather than random poltergeist activity. One evening, Grosse witnessed something extraordinary. Janet levitated slightly above her bed, arms rigid at her sides, her eyes staring straight ahead. Around her, small objects, books, a toy, even a cup, floated briefly before crashing to the floor. The room felt alive, as though it were responding to the entity's will. Grosse shivered, realizing that he was witnessing something that defied natural laws. Playfair took careful measurements of the room, marking where objects had moved, noting temperatures, and documenting sounds. He observed faint cold spots near the corners where the entity seemed strongest. Even he, a man familiar with psychic research, could not explain the phenomena. Every night brought new challenges. Floating furniture, moving objects, doors slamming, and the terrifying deep voice that seemed to control the environment. Despite the chaos, the Hodgsons found a strange comfort in the investigators' presence. Grosse and Playfair were calm and professional, observing the phenomena without fear or hysteria. They explained what they were doing and assured the family that the events were being carefully documented. The children, still fearful, began to trust these outsiders, though the house remained a place of unease. The investigation also attracted local attention. Neighbors peeked through windows, some staying long enough to witness objects moving or chairs tipping. Word spread of the unusual happenings, and journalists occasionally visited, attempting to capture evidence. The house was no longer just a home. It had become a stage for something extraordinary, drawing experts, skeptics, and the curious alike. Over the following weeks, Grosse and Playfair meticulously documented hundreds of incidents. They captured photographs of Janet levitating, audio recordings of the disembodied voice, and written notes of objects moving without explanation. Even skeptics who reviewed the evidence were forced to admit that something unusual was occurring. The presence in the Hodgson house was undeniable, intelligent, and powerful. For Peggy, the investigators' arrival was a relief. Though fear still gripped the household, she felt a sense of control returning. The haunting had not ended, but now, experts were observing, documenting, and attempting to understand. The presence of Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair transformed the terrifying experience into a case study, one that would later become one of the most famous poltergeist investigations in history. Yet, for all the cameras, tape recorders, and measurements, the house retained its air of mystery. The entity, intelligent and unpredictable, continued to challenge the investigators at every turn. Objects moved without warning, voices spoke from nowhere, and Janet sometimes levitated unexpectedly. The haunting had escalated beyond the family alone. It now involved witnesses, experts, and the world outside. By the end of this period, it was clear that the Hodgson house was no ordinary home. It had become a theater for forces beyond comprehension, a place where the living and the unseen collided. The investigators had arrived, but the haunting was far from over. The stage was set for even stranger, more terrifying events to follow. The chaos at 284 Green Street had not subsided. Objects continued to move without explanation, doors slammed violently, and Janet's levitation episodes became more frequent. The Hodgson family had endured weeks of fear, with investigators Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair meticulously documenting every event. But word of the haunting had spread far beyond Enfield. It reached the ears of two of the most famous paranormal investigators in the world, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed, a stern and determined man, and Lorraine, a soft-spoken medium with an acute sensitivity to spirits, arrived in London in 1978. Their reputation preceded them, and while some welcomed their presence, others were skeptical. The Warrens were known for dramatic interpretations of hauntings, often attributing events to demonic activity. For Peggy and her children, the arrival of the Warrens added both hope and anxiety. Would they finally understand the terror that had invaded their home, or would their presence complicate matters further? Upon entering the house, Ed and Lorraine immediately sensed the tension. The air was thick with unease, the shadows long and unsettling. Lorraine claimed she felt the presence of Bill Wilkins, the former resident whose voice had haunted Janet, but also something darker, more commanding, lurking in the corners. Ed set up his equipment while observing the family carefully, determined to document anything unusual. From the start, the involvement of the Warrens was controversial. Maurice Grosse, who had been observing the phenomena for weeks, noted that the Warrens arrived uninvited, arriving in the middle of his carefully planned investigation. Lyon Playfair was cautious, welcoming outside expertise, but wary of the American duo's reputation for exaggeration. Nevertheless, the Warrens proceeded to conduct their own observations, interviewing Janet and the other children. It was during these sessions that tensions arose. Lorraine claimed she could sense a malevolent spirit, more than just the poltergeist of Bill Wilkins. She insisted that the entity had demonic qualities and was actively attempting to control Janet. Peggy listened anxiously, unsure whether to feel relief that the Warrens understood the haunting or dread at the idea of a more sinister presence. During one chilling moment, Janet began levitating mid-sentence while speaking in Bill Wilkins' voice. Lorraine gasped softly, insisting that the energy was stronger and darker than anything she had encountered in her many investigations. Ed moved cautiously, keeping a protective hand near Janet while recording every motion. Even the children were on edge, their fear now mingled with confusion. Meanwhile, Grosse and Playfair observed from a distance, noting discrepancies in the Warrens' interpretations. They believed the phenomena could be explained by poltergeist activity tied to Janet's stress and psychological state, rather than a demonic presence. The two teams, each confident in their approach, operated in parallel, sometimes clashing in interpretation but united in documenting the events. The Warrens' involvement drew media attention. Journalists and curious neighbors flocked to the house, eager to witness one of the most famous hauntings in England. Lorraine allowed some visitors to observe, describing the supposed demonic influence while Ed explained the precautions they were taking to protect Janet. The presence of the Warrens amplified public interest, creating both fascination and skepticism. Despite the controversy, the Warrens did witness the phenomena firsthand. Chairs tipped on their own, drawers slammed shut, and Janet levitated multiple times. The children, though frightened, followed instructions during the investigations. Lorraine claimed she saw subtle shadowy movements near corners of the room, while Ed captured photographs and audio recordings of unexplained sounds. These occurrences added to the mounting evidence of a real and active supernatural presence in the house. Yet, critics continued to question the Warrens' role. Some suggested that their dramatic interpretations overshadowed the meticulous scientific documentation by Grosse and Playfair. Others wondered whether the Americans were exaggerating the haunting to enhance their reputation. Even within the house, tension between the investigators was palpable, as each interpreted the events through very different lenses, one scientific, the other spiritual. For the Hodgson family, the Warrens' involvement was a mixed blessing. On one hand, they brought experience, attention, and reassurance that the events were being taken seriously. On the other hand, their claims of demonic presence intensified fear in the household, suggesting that the entity haunting Janet was far more powerful and dangerous than anyone had imagined. By the end of their visit, Ed and Lorraine had documented significant activity, though much remained unresolved. They left the Hodgson home with detailed records, photographs, and audio recordings, but also with questions. The haunting had not abated. The entity remained active and unpredictable. The controversy surrounding their involvement would follow the case for decades, with supporters praising their insight and skeptics criticizing their interpretations. What was undeniable, however, was that the Enfield Poltergeist had grown even more infamous. The arrival of Ed and Lorraine Warren had brought international attention, added layers of fear and mystery, and solidified the haunting as one of the most documented and debated supernatural cases in history. For Peggy and her children, life inside the house remained a daily challenge, a mix of terror, fascination, and the unknown. The Warrens' presence left one lasting impression. The haunting was not just a local curiosity. It had become a global story, a case study of the unexplained, and a chilling reminder that some forces, unseen and powerful, might never be fully understood. The Hodgsons had survived weeks of terror, but the entity haunting their home had shown that it was far from finished, and the world had only begun to witness its power. Weeks had passed since Ed and Lorraine Warren's visit to the Hodgson household. Yet, despite the presence of experienced paranormal investigators and meticulous documentation by Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, the house at 284 Green Street remained a place of fear and uncertainty. The strange occurrences, levitating objects, disembodied voices, and inexplicable movement had not ended. For the Hodgson family, life inside the home continued to be a mixture of terror and fragile routines. Janet, once a cheerful and curious child, had grown cautious and withdrawn. Even during the day, she glanced at corners and shadows as though expecting a presence to appear. Her levitation episodes had become less frequent but more intense when they did occur. Chairs toppled suddenly, books flew off shelves, and sometimes, the deep voice of Bill Wilkins echoed through the rooms. The house had become unpredictable, alive in a way no one could explain. Peggy tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She cooked meals, did the laundry, and made sure the children went to school. Yet, every creak of the floorboards or rustle of furniture made her heart race. She had learned to anticipate the strange energy that filled the house, but even she could not predict the entity's next action. The air often felt colder than it should, and faint drafts moved through rooms even when windows and doors were firmly closed. The investigators had documented thousands of incidents. Photographs showed Janet levitating, objects were recorded moving without explanation, and audio devices captured knocks, creaks, and whispers. Some nights were calm, giving the family brief respite, but the house's energy never truly left. It seemed to wait, watching, as though it were testing the family's resolve. Questions arose that no one could answer. Was the haunting caused by the spirit of Bill Wilkins alone, or was there a darker force at work? Was Janet's involuntary levitation the result of a poltergeist driven by her fear and energy, or was it something more? The voice of Bill Wilkins had knowledge no one could explain, but skeptics suggested it could be a trick, a child's subconscious manifesting the fear she felt. Even among the investigators, debate raged. Grosse and Playfair insisted that many events could be explained as poltergeist activity amplified by stress and fear. The Warrens, on the other hand, maintained that a supernatural, possibly demonic, presence had taken hold of the home. Neither side could definitively prove their claims. The evidence was compelling yet inconclusive, leaving lingering doubts. Neighbors who had witnessed objects moving or chairs tipping were similarly divided. Some firmly believed the house was haunted, recounting the strange noises and levitation they had seen firsthand. Others thought the family might have exaggerated events for attention. Even the local media could not reach a consensus, though the story of 284 Green Street captured national fascination. Despite the uncertainty, the haunting had left a permanent mark on the Hodgsons. Sleep was never fully restorative, and moments of peace were rare. Janet continued to avoid certain rooms, and Johnny sometimes flinched at ordinary sounds. Peggy, though resilient, often found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting a sudden disturbance. Their lives had changed forever, and the house was no longer simply a home. It was a place of enduring mystery and caution. The lingering questions extended beyond the family. Scholars, skeptics, and paranormal enthusiasts continued to study the Enfield case. Was it one of the most convincing poltergeist incidents in history, or a carefully orchestrated hoax? Could a child's mind inadvertently create such phenomena, or was there an unseen force influencing reality? The debate persisted, ensuring that the story of the Hodgsons would be discussed for decades to come. For those who experienced the events firsthand, the answers mattered less than the reality of the occurrences. Chairs had toppled, objects had flown, and Janet had levitated. The fear, the uncertainty, and the inexplicable nature of the house were undeniable. The questions that remained unanswered only added to the haunting allure of the case. In the quiet of the house, Peggy would sometimes sit alone in the living room, listening to the faint creaks and knocks. She knew that the haunting had changed her family forever, yet she also felt a strange resilience. They had survived weeks of terror, endured the unknown, and remained together. The entity within 284 Green Street had proven powerful, but it had not broken them. As the world continued to hear of the Enfield Poltergeist, the case became more than a local story. It was a legend, a chilling reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. For the Hodgson family, the entity remained quiet at times, restless at others. The house held its secrets, the spirit lingered, and the questions remained unanswered. Life went on, but the story of 284 Green Street became a testament to endurance in the face of the unknown. The haunting, the levitations, the disembodied voice, all had left a permanent mark. And in the end, the lingering questions became part of the legend. Was it truly the spirit of Bill Wilkins, a darker force, or something science could never explain? The truth remained just out of reach, leaving fear, curiosity, and fascination intertwined forever. If you love watching the video and wanted to see more videos like this, please subscribe, like, and comment for more stories like this.